Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the next wave of the London community response. We're just letting people in from the waiting room, so please bear with us about 30 seconds and then we'll be getting underway. You'll be joining us in a webinar format, which means that we can't see your faces, we can just see your names appearing on the side of the screen. You also can't see each other, sadly, but we would encourage you to use the chat button at the bottom if you want to introduce yourselves or talk to other delegates who are here in the session this afternoon. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask us during the course of the presentation, there's a Q&A box at the bottom as well, so you can post your questions in there. In terms of format, there's going to be just over 500 of you joining us for this call today, so we may not be able to get through all of your questions, and it'll be very difficult for us to answer questions that are very specific to just your organisation. But we'll be providing an email address that you can get in touch with us if you have any questions that we're not able to answer on today's webinar, so we can follow up with you directly. But if there are questions that you want to ask, do ask them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll do our best to answer those during the course of the webinar as well. Hopefully most people are now in from the waiting room, so we'll get started with the webinar. And a warm welcome to all of you. My name's James, I'm Chief Executive at London Funders, and I'm joined by my colleague Geraldine Blake, who's our Director of Collaboration. We're going to be talking you through Wave 4 of the London Community Response, but also giving you some of the context for how that sits in the wider work that's going on at the moment to support civil society. But importantly, we're going to talk you through some of the process and the practicalities of how you can get your applications into us, and also any questions you've got about how that process works and how we can best support you. So to help us do that, I'm going to share my screen with you because we're going to take you through a number of slides. So hopefully you can now see a slideshow that says London Community Response on your screens. We're going to talk you through this, but also a flag that we'll be sending these slides out to you after the call as well, so you've got access to all of these. In terms of where we're coming from, what we're going to cover today is we're going to give you a quick introduction to London Funders. We're going to explain a little bit about how this work fits within the wider context of funder flexibility during times of crisis, but spend most of the call today talking about the London Community Response, both where we've come from, but more importantly, the current wave in terms of priorities and process and how you can apply. And we'll be situating that within the wider context of the bigger picture for funding in London, so you can get a sense of where we're going beyond here and what the long term holds as well. As I say, we've got time for questions and answers from you. Pop them in the Q&A box as we go. If we get to the point where we can't answer all of your questions, or if they're more specific to your organisation, we will also send you through some notes through email as well, so you can get in touch with us after the call if that's better for you. So to begin with, we'll tell you just a little bit about London Funders. For those of you who don't know, we're the membership network for funders and investors in civil society in London. So just over 170 organisations who make up our membership. And London Funders' role in normal times is to bring funders together to try and look at how we can fund more effectively to support civil society and communities in London. Clearly, that's become a much bigger priority during COVID-19 to make sure that funders are on your side through this time of crisis. But we've been around for 25 years and we'll continue to support funders beyond this crisis as well, so that that work can be as effective as possible. You can find out more about us on the London Funders website as well. One of the things we did quite early on, and this links to the point about flexibility from the funding sector, was we launched the We Stand With the Sector statement back in March, which has over 400 signatories now from across the UK, not just London Funders, and indeed a sister statement that's been developed in Europe as well. And what we'd encourage you to do is, as a first port of call, is just check that list to see if any of your current funders are signed up there, because they've all committed to being understanding with you through times of crisis, including this second lockdown, thinking about adapting activities, how you can be flexible around dates and financial reporting, so on and so forth. So you can see a full list of all the funders on there. Recognising that lockdown 2 brings some additional challenges for us, and also as we start to look ahead to the next financial year, we're acutely aware that from civil society's point of view, concerns about where funding is coming from the 1st of April onwards. So we've also put out a new statement, the Still Standing With the Sector statement, that renews those pledges, particularly through this lockdown period, but also has some new commitments around listening to the sector and making sure that our priorities are driven by your needs and the needs of communities. That we're learning together, thinking about how we can take what we've done through crisis that's been positive and bring that to bear on our future funding programmes. And also that we're thinking long term, so that funders are going to be open with you about where their funding is going beyond this crisis period and what kind of thinking we're doing to help shape where that funding goes for the future. So again, there's over 150 funders who've already signed up to that new statement, and you can check out that full list on the separate website there, covid19funders.org.uk. but we're mainly here today to talk to you about the London Community Response. And the story so far of this is that this is a simple application portal we hope for you to be able to access funding from a number of different funders. So in the waves that we've had up till now, 65 funders from across sectors have come together to give out funding through waves 1 to 3, and another 2 new funders have joined us for wave 4. So 67 funders sit behind this portal and are looking at the applications as they come in to help make decisions about where to make those grants. The original portal opened just 4 days after the first lockdown started, and since then we've gone through 3 waves of funding with just over 6,500 applications processed. Collectively, people asked for just over £133 million, and that's led to grants of just under £42 million being given out to just under 2,600 groups across London. We've published grant lists of all the people who've received grants in the previous waves, which you can see on the London Community Response website, so you can get a sense of where some of that funding has gone. And we'll also continue to post new reports on there that show data and insights about where that's gone in previous waves. In terms of some of the themes that have been supported over time, just to give you a sense of where some of that money's going, the biggest category is children and young people, and the second biggest is people at risk, by which we mean people at risk of complications or difficulties because of COVID-19. But you'll see there's quite a broad spread there across other sectors as well, including advice, food, domestic violence, arts and culture, and so on. So to give you a sense of what boxes people ticked as they were applying for funding in previous waves. We're really clear though that just because you tick a box to say you're delivering a food project, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the main focus of your work or what's going to be delivered in terms of positive outcomes for your community. So we also do text analysis of the applications to help give us a sense of where some of the priorities are and where some of the needs are for communities at the moment. And these are just a couple of word clouds from applications that were received in the previous wave that show really clearly that really big concerns from the sector around mental health in the word cloud on the left, which relates to beneficiaries and communities. And on the right, in terms of organisations, real concern also there for mental health, wellbeing, resilience of staff members and volunteers. So those have all been woven into the priorities that we've set for the new wave of funding as well. This wave that we're talking to you about today is what we're calling Wave 4. Across the partnership, just over £4 million has been pledged so far that will be given out in grants by the funders in the partnership. The application window opened on Thursday of last week and will stay open until 5 o'clock on the 3rd of December. Applications will be processed as they come in, so we'd encourage you to get your applications in early, because that will help the funders to make quick decisions wherever possible. But we'll try and make sure that all decisions are with people by Friday the 18th of December, if you get those applications in time, and obviously with all the attachments and everything that you're being asked for. And we'll go through all of that in just a minute. Grants are for up to £10,000 in this wave, and they're focused on navigating crisis. So working with you to look at what some of the urgent needs are of communities and trying to make sure that you can be supported to meet them. Recognising that this is not a short-term thing, the current lockdown obviously it only runs for another few weeks, but we are aware there are pressures over the winter months and beyond for communities. So this is funding that can be focused just on the immediate period or up to a period of 6 months, and you'll be asked on the application form to specify that length of time that you want to cover. And all of the guidance on that application are on the London Community Response website. In terms of organisations who are eligible to apply, you can see a full list there in terms of the wide range of groups that we're able to support through these funding waves. You can also apply if you're not listed on there via a host organisation. So as long as your work is charitable, but it might be that there's reasons why you're not currently constituted as one of those groups, for example, a mutual aid group, you are able to apply via a host organisation as long as they meet the criteria of eligibility that are on the screen there. And again, that full list is on the website as well. Our priorities this wave continue the priorities that we've had in the last wave around trying to make sure that we're putting equity and inclusion at the heart of this. So a particular focus on reaching groups that are led by and for communities who've been more affected by or marginalised by COVID-19, particularly Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, people who are deaf and disabled, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender communities, and people from groups that are led by and for women. We're keen to make sure that the funding reaches groups who've got strong connections, strong reach, strong trust by communities. So if you can demonstrate that reach to people who've got a high risk of negative impacts from COVID-19, we're particularly keen to hear from you. And we're also keen to hear from smaller organisations. So typically those with a turnover of under £1 million, but as you'll see in the guidance, we're keen to make sure that grassroots organisations are applying for this as well. And in previous waves, that's where the bulk of the funding has gone, has been focused on small organisations, strong connections, and trying to make sure we're reaching groups that are led by and for communities affected by COVID. The themes that you can apply under are listed on the screen here, everything from advice through to refugees and migrants. For each of these theme areas, you'll also find on the London Funders website a COVID-19 resource hub that pulls together the latest data, research, reports, insights that we have under each of these themes. So you can see the kind of needs that have been picked up by funders and the kind of issues that we're seeking to address. So in your application, you'll be asked to identify which of these themes you most closely identify with as an organisation, and also what the work you're delivering fits within as well. There's 4 slides that I'm going to show you now that summarise the main categories of the Navigating Crisis grants that we're able to award in this wave. The first one is that access to food remains a priority for us. That includes cooked food and reaching people who are not reached by public services. Access to essentials for people facing crisis so that they can access services and support safely. And support for people on mental health and well-being, and that includes tackling isolation and loneliness. The advice sector is a priority within this, particularly around any of the social welfare law advice areas that you'll see on screen here, including reaching people who are experiencing difficulties for the first time through to some of the more complex casework and increases in demand that we're expecting across the sector. We're aware that some communities need some additional support to be reached by some of the messages they put out, and some of the national messaging doesn't necessarily reach everybody in our community. So if you're able to support work that helps to make sure that messages get to people about how they can be safe during this time, there's also funding available for that. Anything from, if you're working in any of those categories and you need support that enhances the capabilities or volunteer management of groups in that sector, including infrastructure groups working on that topic, then you can also apply here. We're keen to support and develop and sustain community action at a local level, including mutual aid groups, so that those local relationships are strengthened. We can offer support to you to adapt your essential services so that you can deliver them safely. That could be through digital channels, that could be through ways that you can develop more low-tech solutions to make sure that you're reaching people who may be digitally excluded as well. And we're also in this wave able to consider development work that enables you to prepare for longer term funding beyond crisis, or helps you to avoid the loss of premises as well. And there's some examples on the screen and a bit more on the website about what we mean by that as well. In terms of what the funding can be used for, there's again guidance on the website that takes you through the different categories, budget headings that we're able to consider. Within people, it can be staff and volunteer costs associated with the work that you're applying for. Within support, we've heard loud and clear about the impact that this is having on staff and volunteers. So we want to make sure that people in organisations are supported and their resilience is supported. So any activities linked to that, any equipment that you need to deliver the work, any software training that you might need in terms of resources for your team are also eligible. As are service costs related to the needs of the people you're working with, any direct additional overheads that you're experiencing as a result of this work, and any costs related to partnership or development that again are specific to the project that you're applying to us for. In terms of what's excluded, we're not able to make direct payments to beneficiaries through this work. There's a link on the website to turn to us that has links to details about grants to individuals. A small number of the funders in the partnership can include voucher costs in applications to them, though not all of the funders in the partnership will be able to fund vouchers if those are in your budget. We can't cover costs that should be covered by public funding, and the example given here is the provision of laptops to pupils by schools. And we also can't fund work that isn't charitable or doesn't benefit London. So in one of the earlier sections of the guidance, you'll be able to see a map just to clarify which London boroughs are covered by this, and also to make sure that if you are, for example, a national organisation or have a broader reach, that you give really clear examples in your application about how you're demonstrating London reach and London benefit with this work. We're going to look now through on the questions that you're going to be asking, you're going to be asked to answer on the application form. My colleague Geraldine is going to take over at this point and just walk you through the key sections of the application form and draw your attention to some of the questions that we get the most responses to in terms of how we can give you some additional guidance on how to fill those in. Geraldine.
Thank you, James. So the application form is, you access it through the London Community Response Fund website. So you just click on apply and it will take you to the application form. And you can download a Word version of the application form so you can see exactly what's coming up and practice your answers, or, you know, if there's a group of you filling it in, you can do it together. But it looks a bit like this on the page. And before we go through it, I just wanted to say, what happens when you've completed it. So when you're on the application form on the website, you can move backwards and forwards through the pages. There are some boxes which are, you have to complete them before you can move on. So for example, things like your postcode and your email address, we need you to complete them before we let you go on to the next page. But once you've filled those boxes on, you can go forwards, you can go backwards, you can save each page as you go and it sends you a link. And then when you get right to the end of the page, you press the submit button. And just briefly, what happens then is the application form comes through to a group of grant managers from all of the collaborating funders, and they do some very quick eligibility checks. So what they're looking at is this organisation eligible? So the question about what kind of organisation you are, and if you've ticked, for example, we're a charity, then our grant managers will just quickly go on the Charity Commission website and check that your charity number matches up, that what you're saying about the organisation is right. The same for companies, we go onto the Companies House website. So just make it, and if you're a group which has a constitution but isn't registered with any of those bodies, then our grants managers will have a quick look at your constitution and just make sure that everything is in order there. So that's the first question, is the organisation eligible to apply? The second question is this application asking for eligible costs? So in the boxes on the application form, which are all about, your funding request, they need to match up with what we're saying in the criteria are eligible. What is this grant roundabout and what are the kind of costs you can ask for? So you need to make sure those things match. And then the third thing we check is, has this organisation uploaded all the attachments that we've asked them for? And there might be reasons why you haven't been able to upload all the attachments, in which case there's a box where you can tell us what those reasons are, and we'll get in touch with you to ask you to send them on to us when you can. But as soon as the grant managers have been able to tick those three questions, is it an eligible organisation, are the costs eligible, and are the attachments there, then what happens is the application gets uploaded to our funder-only portal, where all of those 65 funders will be able to look at your application, and they can search for applications by, there might be funders who say, well, I want to look at applications which are from about advice, or applications which are about food, or applications which are from organisations in Lambeth, or applications which are led by deaf and disabled people. So there's different funders will be looking out for different things. But once you've passed those eligibility checks, you go onto the portal, and that means lots and lots of funders are looking at your application. So important to get those right, and not to fall at the first hurdle. Right, so there are 7 sections on the application form, and we'll just run through them fairly quickly. Next slide, James. So the first section is very short, and this is where you have an opportunity to put yourself into a theme. So the list that James gave earlier, advice, children and young people, food, homelessness. And this time we've given you 2 options. One to say, what's the theme that the focus of your usual work, and then what's the theme which is the focus of this application, because they might be slightly different. And we know for lots of organisations they'll be doing 4 or 5 of these things. So just pick the one that best fits you. It doesn't it doesn't make any difference to your chances of success. It just makes this is how funders look for your application. So if you're thinking about funders who might fund food applications, I want them to have a look at this. There is an opportunity for organisations which are new, which are perhaps mutual aid groups, or an unconstituted group which has come together to respond to the COVID crisis, or maybe is constituted but doesn't yet have a bank account. what we're saying is you should apply via a host organisation. So there's a box on this first page which says, is this a hosted organisation? Are you applying on behalf of somebody else? And then all the way through the application form, it will tell you who needs to fill in each section. Is this the host? Is this about the host, or is this about the hosted organisation? And so the rules about eligibility apply to the host organisation all the way through. James, yes. This one is very straightforward. This is just tell us who you are so that we can get in touch with you. And then some information about your organisation. So the important one here is question 10, what type of organisation are you? So this is the one that gets checked before you go onto the portal. And that should be a fairly self-explanatory list. You know, are you a charity? Are you a company that's limited by guarantee, or a CIC that's limited by guarantee? We can't fund anyone who's limited by shares, so you have to be limited by guarantee. Are you a constituted community association? Those kinds of things. We ask for whatever type of organisation you are, we ask that you have at least 3 trustees or 3 directors or 3 management committee members. There may be a reason why you don't have 3 of those, and you can use the box at the end of the application form to explain a bit more about that. But that's a basic rule of thumb, is you need to have 3 directors. So this programme is not open to people who are sole traders or who are the single person running an organisation. Also, question 13 here is about being led by and for marginalised communities. We're defining that as more than 50% of an organisation's trustees and senior management staff. These questions, there are other questions through the application form that are kind of checks on that. So, you know, if you tick this one, and then you also need to think about, well, actually, who is it you're targeting, and what are the issues that you're working on, so that funders can really understand, you know, this is an organisation which is genuinely led by the people for whom it's serving. And we should say that nearly 3/4 of the applications in wave 3, of the grants in wave 3, went to organisations who were led by. So it is, when funders say they are prioritising those organisations, they're really serious about the fact they're prioritising those organisations. This again, these are some of the questions that help us check the answers to that. Carry on, James. Fairly straightforward questions. Hopefully this won't take you too long, this section. Next page, James. There's some additional questions in this round in wave 4, which you won't have seen on previous applications if you've applied before, which is about the building that you work out of. So if you're just renting a room to, you know, deliver a workshop or whatever, you don't need to tick yes to this. But if you're, you know, running your own building, this is where you tick yes. And there are some funders who are particularly interested in supporting organisations to think about their buildings. So you'll have seen that showed up earlier in the guidance note, the kinds of things that we're looking to fund. Carry on, please, James. So there's a fairly short section on the financial information, and we ask you for, in question 23, we ask you for 3 years of information. So that's where you think you're going to end up this year, what happened in the most recent financial year, and what happened the year before that. If you don't have information for previous years, that's fine, don't worry about that. You can just put a 0 in those boxes. And there is a question about how stable you expect your organisation to be at the end of this financial year. So we're assuming that because we're now in November, that most people will either have their financial year end in December or possibly March. So you should have a pretty good idea about where you're going to be by then. And that we hope that that question isn't too challenging to answer. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that different funders will have be willing to take different levels of risk in terms of, you know, if you say that actually you're not expecting to be that financially stable, that doesn't necessarily rule you out from receiving a grant. Okay, James, next slide. Yes, so this is about previous grants that you might have got from us, and the following slide as well is if you're asking any other funders for these grants. If you have had a grant from the London Community Response before, that grant might have ended, in which case you can tell us that in the box. That grant might be about to end, or you might be applying for something which is actually different from the previous grant. So it doesn't mean if you've had a grant before, you can apply again. You just need to give us a bit of information about when it's going to end and any overlaps that there might be with it. Carry on, James. Right, this is the section. This is the section where you get to tell us about why you need a grant, what's the need you've identified, how that need relates to the COVID crisis or a winter crisis. So this isn't just about we need money to carry on doing what we would have done anyway in any normal year. It's about why is this, why do you need a crisis grant this winter in particular? And this is where you can tell us about how COVID has impacted the people you work with, about how COVID has impacted your organisation, and about what you want to do with a grant. This question 31, this request summary, this goes to all of the funders. So the clearer you can make that, the better. Carry on, please, James. Question 32 is the one where you can really set out clearly for us, you know, who you're going to reach, what you're going to do, how you know that that's needed, and the kind of difference that you hope that is going to make. You don't need to give us kind of detailed monitoring and impact assessment metrics or anything like that. Keep it really simple, but demonstrate to funders in this section. Do you want to carry on to the next slide as well, James? Demonstrate to funders in this section that you know what you're talking about. You know how to reach the people who most need your help, that you have expertise in doing it. And the more simply you can explain all of this, the better. Some of the funders will be real experts in this area, but some of them will be not exactly lay people, but you know, we'll have less expertise in some of the areas that they are now starting to fund in. So make sure you've explained it as clearly as possible. Next slide, please. So we need to make sure that if this is an application that comes from a host who is hosting somebody else, that they've both seen the application, they're both happy with what you're putting in here, and that there's a clear relationship between them about how the grant is going to be managed. And then we also ask you about when you want the grant to start and end. There are drop-down menus here with options that go up to June 2021. So it could be January to June, it could be December to May, it could be January to March. You tell us, but make sure that, you know, if you're applying for 3 months or 6 months, that what you then go on to put in the budget field matches the length of the project that you want. Next slide, please. These questions are about safeguarding. We recognise that you know, people's safeguarding will have issues will be very different. You know, when people are delivering things digitally rather than face to face, people will need to have reviewed their safeguarding processes. There are some resources you can click through from this question. There are some resources on the website. So we've signposted you to some places you might like to have a look at. If you're working with children and young people, even though we're in lockdown, you may still be able to be doing some face-to-face work directly with young people, and you will need to have read the guidance from the National Youth Agency. And there's some additional uploads that you'll need to give us at the end of the application. Okay, so your budget. We've suggested some headings you might like to use. You don't need to use these ones. You can give us your own. Just to say that funders are very aware that the people who are delivering the work, you know, volunteers, staff, are very, very stretched themselves. So we've offered here, funders have offered here to pay for additional support for your staff. So do make use of that as a budget heading, because funders are up for that. Next slide, please. So you've given us the, oh, can we go back one? You've given us the numbers, and now we need you to give us some notes. So make sure you've given us a quick note about how you've arrived at those numbers. The more information you give here, the less follow-up funders need to do. Okay, carry on. So the attachments here, and these are really important. So everybody needs to attach their governing document and their most recent annual accounts. And if you're an organisation which is new and doesn't yet have annual accounts, then attach your management accounts or your record of income and expenditure, or however it is you're managing your money. If you're a constituted organisation but you're not registered, so you're not a registered charity or registered company, you'll need to send us the name and addresses of your management committee members. And if you're doing direct work with service users, online or face-to-face, we need to see your safeguarding policy. Next one, please. If you're doing the face-to-face work, and when we say face-to-face, we mean properly face-to-face in real life, not online face-to-face. If you're doing face-to-face work with children and young people, there are a couple of additional attachments you need to do here. And then this isn't a required one, but you, at some point, you will need to share with the funder a bank statement. Which will need to match the name of the organisation so that they can pay you a grant. So you can attach that now, or you can have a conversation with the funder about that as you go through. So yes, that's everything we need from you for the application form. So I suppose those, just to recap on those things, you know, explain clearly why this is needed and why this is COVID related. Be really clear about who you're reaching and why you can reach them. Try and explain things to us as simply as possible. Make sure that you connect what you're talking to those the criteria, the eligibility criteria that are in the guidance. And don't forget to attach all the documents we need from you. And if you do all of that, then we ought to be able to get an answer to you by the 18th of December. James.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Geraldine. I'm just going to place this, everything that we've just said there about this emergency and urgent funding around Wave 4 in the wider context of funding in London. We hear really clearly when we go out to talk to civil society groups about the importance of thinking about funding beyond the crisis as well. And we know through the London Community Response Survey that a lot of groups are expressing concern about what's happening with funding beyond the end of this financial year. So a couple of slides here just to try and put this into some context. I mentioned at the beginning that across the London Funders membership, there's 170 funders who give out grants to civil society across all of the London boroughs and across all of the themes. In our most recent mapping of their grants, in the last year, they gave out just over £500 million worth of funding. The grants that have gone out through the London Community Response so far have been really important, but they are only £42 million of that total amount. So the funders within the partnership are also in their own way making separate grants, are giving additional grants to organisations who they're already in contact with, are running their own programmes as well. So we just give that note of caution that whilst this has been a really big focus for us and there's been a lot of effort that's put into bringing together this funder collaboration, there's still a lot of funding out there. There's still a lot of work that funders are doing to try to make sure funding comes to you. This isn't the only thing that's going to happen in terms of funding. Funders are also thinking about how they've spent that £500 million this year, how they'll spend that £500 million next year. There'll be £500 million the year after. This is money that people are going to be looking at how we invest for the long term. So funders are on your side beyond this crisis. They're here for you now. They will be here for you in the next financial year as well. To help give you some sort of flavour about where they're thinking, we've commissioned a report that we'll be publishing in the first weeks of December that brings together some thinking from different funders about where they're going next with funding, to give you a sense of what some of the mood music is about where some of the priorities are going to be for the future. We're going to be sharing that with everyone who's interested in it. That'll be published openly on our website, and we're happy to circulate that through networks as well, just to try and get the messages out there about what's going on with the future of funding. For the London Community Response, we're also thinking about a longer term programme alongside this crisis piece. So we're hoping by the new year to be launching a programme that offers grants through into the next financial year and beyond. We're currently working with partners to look at what funding might be available for that and what the priorities are. We hope that we'll be able to show you some of the headlines before the end of the calendar year, so that you've got that information before any breaks that you're taking. But we will certainly be looking to try and bring that forward so that funding opens for applications in January. We'd also encourage you to continue to share your insights about what funding is needed through the London Community Response Survey that's coordinated by our colleagues at the GLA. You can see there's a link on the screen there, and there's an email address on that page where you can sign up to be sent copies of that survey. That's done every couple of weeks. It's a sort of pulse tracker that tries to tell us what's going on in civil society, gets feedback from groups about what some of the priorities are now and what some of the concerns are for the longer term as well. And that data is incredibly helpful to us in helping to design some of the priorities for the funding that you're hearing about today, but we'll also be looking out for the long term as well. So do check out that survey and complete it if you have time as well. In terms of some useful resources that we'll make sure you've got access to, we do send out newsletters from London Funders with details about funding programmes that are open and that are coming up. And there's also wider information that we publish on our main website. So you can sign up for that and see that the past copies of that on the London Funders website. Obviously, all of the guidance that we've talked you through today and the application form are available on the London Community Response website, so the link to that is on the screen as well. We're quite active, as you might have seen, on Twitter, so do follow us at London Funders because we do post updates there as they're happening, any news that we get, so that's normally the first place that we're able to get things out to you as quickly as we can. And we also retweet content from funders across London to give you a sense of what else is going on in the picture as well. And we're going to go through in a second some of the questions that you've asked in the box, but clearly we're not in the time available going to be able to go through all of them. We'll do our best to answer them, but if you do need more information after this call, do drop us an email to the info@London Funders address so we can follow up with you directly. We'll also be sending out these slides after the call as well, so you've got copies of all of those. I'll stop screen sharing there. So Geraldine and I will do our best to answer some of the questions that you've popped in the Q&A box. There's a few of them that we've answered live as well. So if your question has disappeared, you'll see it in the answered box. There's some extra links and some extra resources that we've already typed in there. I'm going to try and group some of these together. So apologies if I missed some of the nuances of what you've asked, but we'll do our best to try to make sure we answer them. So the first question is about when will decisions be made? And this includes questions about whether things are being dealt with on a first come, first served basis and or whether they're going to be made after the 18th of December. The reality in terms of the process is that applications that are coming in are being assessed right now. So some applications have already been received, they've already been sifted, they're already being looked at by funders. As things come through, they will be looked at and some funding decisions will be taken before the 18th of December. So we would encourage you to get your applications in as early as you can. The 3rd of December is the sort of final cut-off point so that decisions are made by the 18th of December. But wherever possible, we'll be making application assessments as we go and getting those decisions to you as quickly as we can. One that I'm going to pass on to Geraldine is a group of questions about what we're looking for in a larger charity. So a few people have said, for example, they're a smaller branch of a larger charity, or their turnover is over £1 million, or they're a much larger organisation that has income that's mostly for statutory services, and actually their charitable work is a smaller part of that. So just some thoughts about what we might be looking for in applications for larger organisations to demonstrate their reach into London communities.
So the something like 85% of the funding in Wave 3 went to organisations with a turnover of under £1 million. So again, you know, when funders are making smaller organisations a priority, they are taking that seriously. But some larger organisations got funded, and those will have been the ones who have particular expertise. So we see often through the homelessness theme that's where there are larger charities who are getting grants, or domestic violence and abuse theme. We know there are some larger charities there who have real expertise at reaching particular groups of people, or providing a service which is very expert. If you are so I would say it's about demonstrating your expertise there and why you have a unique role to play. If you're a branch of a larger organisation, we can only accept one application form per charity number. So you will need to discuss with the parent charity, if you like, if you've got the same charity number, who's going to make, you know, what you're going to make that application for. And we see that as well with schools. I know there's been some questions about, are schools eligible? If a school is a registered charity, then it's eligible. If a school is part of a multi-academy trust, which is the registered charity, and again, I'm afraid we can only accept one application. So you will need to discuss with the parent trust who's, you know, what that application is going to come from.
Thanks, Jodie.
There's a few questions about host organisations as well. Can I just?
Well, I could get to those in a second if I.
Go on.
Dutifully writing things down, Jodie, and trying to group them together. So I'll come on to those in a second if I can. One was people asking about if they've applied in previous waves, can they get a copy of their application form, and can they get any reasons from us in terms of why they were turned down in previous waves?
So if you had an email from us saying you weren't eligible in a previous wave, get in touch with us and we'll try and give you some feedback before you make another application. If you had an application which didn't say you weren't eligible, it just said you hadn't been selected for funding, then go ahead and apply again. Sorry, was that the whole question? Yes.
Yeah, and if you have applied in previous waves and you haven't got a copy of your application form, it
probably
would have been censored, but do ask us and we can email you a PDF version of that. Because again, as you'd have seen, if you've applied in previous waves, some of the questions are very similar or indeed the same. So you will be able to copy and paste text across to the new application form as well.
And it's the info@londonfunders.org.uk address that you need to use for those questions.
It is indeed. Thank you very much, Jodie. Someone was asking on the chat whether people need to be able to tick all of the priorities or just one. I'd say with that, so obviously you've got the opportunity there to say you are led by and for strong reach and small organisations. You don't have to tick all of them. Those are just the ones that are going to be used to help prioritise applications in the event that we have a bigger surge of applications than we're able to deal with. So those are the priority areas, but obviously not everybody ticks all of those boxes. As Geraldine said, about 85% of those grants went to smaller organisations. In the previous wave, around 75% of the grants went to groups that were led by and for the most targeted communities within that category as well. So you'll see that it's not everybody all the time will fit those priorities, but that is what's used to help give us some priorities there. Some questions about what if you fit in more than one category. So you'll see on the application form that you're asked to identify one category that your organisation most closely fits with, and one if you want to give us a sense of how the work fits as well. But as Geraldine says, those don't affect whether you do or don't get funding. They're just ones that are used to help filter the applications so that we can then do the assessments in batches as they come in. Geraldine, a couple of questions on the budget. So one was somebody asking if they needed to fill in every section of the budget. For example, if they were volunteer-led and they didn't have any salaries, were there any problems in skipping certain sections of the budget. And also people asking if they can apply for contributions towards a project where there might be other costs they're applying to from other funders as well.
So the first one, no, you don't need to use every line in the budget. There's suggested headings that we've given you, but you can use your own headings. So if you don't have staff costs, don't put those in. You might have volunteer costs. You might there might be some costs of using volunteers that you want to include instead. Sorry, James, my memory, I couldn't remember the second part of the question.
So it's about whether you can get contribution towards costs that are covered by, you might be making an application to other funders as well.
Yes, so I think just put in the costs in the budget that you want us to cover, but you can make a note elsewhere that this is part of a larger project. So we've had in previous rounds some applications for, I don't know, £250,000 project, which would immediately get knocked out because it's not eligible. But if they'd said, actually, we'd like a £10,000 contribution from you towards a 30 grand project, that possibly would have got through.
Fantastic, thanks, Geraldine. Can I give you the host organisation question? So people asking what kind of organisations can they be and have a host organisation? So if they're a private limited company and so on, and if there's any differences in the eligibility if you're a host organisation, any considerations that we need to flag for people who are thinking of taking that on.
So if you're a host organisation, it's the same list of types of, or you need to be one of those types of eligible organisations. You can be a host for other organisations if they are mutual aid organisations, if they are groups which have come together to address this, if they are new groups which don't have a bank account. You can't be a host for somebody who is a sole trader in a private business because that won't be, they might be part of a mutual aid group or something like that. But, the fact that they're a sole trader in a business is kind of neither here nor there, and it isn't helpful really for this application. If you are a host organisation, you can apply more than once. So you can apply as a host, and then you can apply again for yourself. So in the last round, we had some organisations, some of our equity partners acted as hosts for 2 or 3 different applications.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Geraldine. People are asking about what sort of outreach we're doing to organisations to help people to fill in their applications. Particular questions there about whether we're able to make information available through BSL, whether we're doing outreach to groups including Turkish and Kurdish communities. We're really keen to try to make sure we're reaching as many people as possible. And if you are a network group, an infrastructure organisation, or you've got reach into groups, you might be eligible for this funding. And we are able to come and do webinars or talks or things with groups as well to try to do that. We've also funded and worked through a number of equity partner organisations who are supporting us with getting messages out and helping to make sure that the process is accessible as possible. So again, there may be work that we can do in partnership with them to try to make sure that we are being as open as we can be, because we're really keen to try to make sure that we're reaching people. So if you do have suggestions or ideas about where we can come and talk to you, please do let us know, because we're very happy to do that. Geraldine, can I ask you a couple of questions on the budgeting side in terms of what kind of things are eligible for costs there, or rather the kind of organisations that are applying for things? So can new organisations apply? How do any costs that are related to hosted organisations get factored into the budgets as well? If you are sort of doing a budget coming in via a host organisation, how you can best present your finances within that context? Whose budget is it? Basically, I think is the short version of that rumble.
So the grant will be held by the host organisation. If the host organisation is going to charge for being a host, then I would put that cost in as an overhead. But our assumption is that the rest of the costs are the things that the hosted organisation needs to do in order to deliver the project. So you can itemise those in the budget fields.
Thanks, Geraldine. A couple of questions that people have asked about whether we've got statistics on how many people have applied versus how many people have been awarded grants. So again, there was a couple of things on the slides earlier on that we'll circulate around to you just to give you a sense of scale in previous waves. So that figure of just over £133 million worth of ask was made versus the just under £42 million that's been distributed. So we've got some numbers that are up on the website already, and we'll continue to put new ones up there so you get a sense of success rates from previous waves. And we'll also be publishing that for future waves as well. So this wave and any others will also publish all of the grants lists and all the data about how many applications came in and how many were assessed as eligible and how many then went on to be funded. We're also working with some partners to try and make sure that data is accessible in a more sort of searchable format so that you'll be able to layer some of that data if you wanted to analyse it for yourself. So we're trying to make sure that's as open as possible. And all of the funders are committed to publishing their grants on 360 Giving, so you can get a sense of where that money's gone, alongside some of the other COVID emergency grants as well. Geraldine, a question on how some of the funders are looking at the applications that you might be able to give an answer to from having been part of some of the discussions, is that point about strong connections. What does a strong reach into a community look like? What kind of things have funders been having in mind as they've looked at how organisations have or haven't sort of demonstrated that reach into the communities that they're working with, potentially through, I guess, their track records, some of the led by and for, and how they're able to demonstrate that actually they've got those connections and they've got that understanding. Are there some things you've got from having seen some of those applications come through?
Well, I think we're these are very experienced funders who know what to look for in an application. So, you know, looking at, you know, even if you're not led by I don't know, if you're not able to tick that box, but you know you can show that you have provided services to particular communities before, that you've done that successfully, that you understand what some of the issues might be, some of the challenges might be for that community, that you have thought about different approaches, different ways of getting services out to people who might otherwise find it hard to access them. So that's where the you know, the box is about, tell us how this is impacting the communities you work with, tell us about what it is you want to do, tell us about who it is you're trying to reach. That's where you can really use those boxes well.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions from people who've applied in previous waves, just checking whether they can apply again and whether they were able to apply in this wave for some continuation funding for work that they started in previous waves. I think the point is that, yes, if you've applied in previous waves, you can apply again, whether you're successful or unsuccessful. We have people who've applied in each wave who've been successful. It's the question that Geraldine flagged on the application form will ask you to check and confirm to us what funding you've got and whether you're able to use it for different purposes, just to make sure this is additional or it's for different work that you're doing or there's new needs that have emerged. But yes, you can. There's nothing if you applied for or had a grant in previous waves that you can, there's no reason why you can't apply in this one as well. There's a few questions, Geraldine, on application eligibility. So people are saying that they're an organisation that's been constituted for a while, but they've been dormant, so they don't have any recent accounts, or that they've got a CIC that's just over a year old. Are there any sort of lengths on incorporation or how long people have had their accounts for in eligibility versus, you know, compared to whether they should apply on their own or whether they ought to be applying via a host organisation?
So funders will look at applications from organisations who don't have accounts yet. You know, so if you're new and you don't yet have an account, as long as you've got a bank account that a funder can pay a grant into, they will probably contact you for more information. Yes, but what you can upload instead of your accounts, if you don't have them, is, you know, any kind of financial management accounts document or your income and, you know, however it is that you you're keeping track of your income and outgoings. So that shouldn't be that shouldn't exclude you. If you've been dormant, I think you would need to show on your application form, you know, what you've been, why you've come back to life, what you've been doing, and again upload whatever financial information you can about this year's income and expenditure.
Fantastic, Geraldine. Just a couple of questions that I'm going to answer and then I'm going to let you all go. First one is about the fund being advertised as unrestricted and whether people can apply for unrestricted funding or is it related to a project. What we're asking you to do through the application form is to give a budget for the work that you need to do. Where possible, the funders will give that grant to you if you're successful as an unrestricted grant, recognising there needs to be a bit of flexibility at times around some areas of work and the level of uncertainty that people are navigating at the moment. Some of them will still need to give you a grant as a restricted grant, and that's why the project budget is specified in that way, because it enables those who can give unrestricted grants to look at it and give you an unrestricted grant, but those who have to give a restricted grant because of where their funding has come from to also still give you the grant. So it just means you've got the sort of best of both worlds, as it were, through the application process. We will try to give unrestricted grants through the partnership, but not every funder is able to do that. And the final one, just on the equity and inclusion piece, people asking if they are, why over 50% user-led is such a priority, and then also people are saying they are more than 50% of multiple of those categories. I think why over 50% is such and user-led is such a priority for us is just looking at some of the historic patterns of funding that have been, that some of these groups have traditionally not been resourced very well by the funders in the partnership. And when we've looked at all of the data that's publicly available, and again through the links that there are on the London Community Response website, really high levels of need have been identified within certain communities. And we're really keen to make sure that this funding reaches groups that have the trust and the reach into those communities, which is why user-led is such a key part of the programme this time round. And if you are a majority of multiple of those categories, it doesn't make you less eligible at all. There's boxes where you can tick to say that you are more than 50% women, more than 50% Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, more than 50% definitely disabled, more than 50% LGBT+. So you can specify that. And there's also, for those of you who asked in terms of wider considerations, there's also questions that ask you about whether your leadership is more than 50% of people with lived experience of the issue that you're dealing with. And there's some definitions on the website for you as well. So hopefully we've managed to counter through quite a lot of your questions there. I appreciate not all of them, and apologies for those of you who we didn't quite get to. If you had a specific question that we haven't answered, or you have one about your own organisation that you want to ask us, please do send it through to the info@London Funders email address, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. Apologies that it might take us a short while because there's quite a lot of you and there's only 4 of us, but we will work as quickly as we can to get answers to you so you can get on with your applications. Very best of luck to those of you who are making applications before the 3rd of December. Any final tips or thoughts, Geraldine, before we go?
Just there is an FAQs document on the website which has answers to most of these questions in, and if there's ones that have come up lots of times in the chat which aren't in there, we'll update it now.
Fantastic. That is a very good resource that Geraldine has correctly flagged there. We're like some kind of modern day BBC breakfast thing in the afternoon for you here, just seamless presentations. But yes, the FAQ documents we will update with some extra resources after today. We hope it's been helpful for you. If you do have access to groups who'd be eligible for the funding and you can help us get the message out there, we're really keen that this goes as far and wide to try to make sure that people who are eligible can access funding. Thank you for the fantastic work you're all doing out in communities at the moment to support people through some very difficult times and some challenging months ahead. We hope we can support you through that with some of these grants, and also as we look ahead to the future of funding beyond this crisis as well. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye bye for now.